Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are taking a really fascinating journey through time to figure out one of the most absolutely crucial mechanisms of human civilization, which is, well, how we actually govern ourselves. We're going to explore how human representation has evolved. We'll trace the whole thing, from ancient tribal councils and gatherings of wise men, all the way to the digital democracy tools that define our modern era. If you've ever found yourself wondering how power actually shifted from monarchs to the masses, or how those age-old democratic institutions are scrambling to keep up with the 21st century today, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's kind of amazing just how intimidating the machinery of government can seem today, right? With all the grand buildings and hyper-complex procedures. But if we strip all of that back, the origins of the word parliament are surprisingly simple. It actually comes from the 11th century Old French word parlement, which literally just means a discussion or discourse, and that stems from the verb parler, simply to talk. Long before it became this formal legislative body, a parliament was, quite simply, an event. It was just a place where people gathered to talk, negotiate, and resolve their disputes.
So here is our chronological journey for today. First, we'll look at the roots of the parliament. Second, developing the modern system. Third, the public engagement imperative. Fourth, how parliaments engage today. And fifth, the future of democracy. We're traveling from ancient history straight into the tools you can use to influence your government right now.
Section 1. Roots of the Parliament, the earliest foundations of lawmaking.
It's really incredible to think about how those early gatherings actually began to formalize. Long before grand ornate chambers ever existed, societies relied heavily on advisory councils, like the Anglo-Saxon meeting of wise men, just to assess major decisions. From there, the circle of representation slowly but surely expanded across Europe over the centuries. In Iceland, for example, we see the Althing established way back in 930 AD. This actually originated from Viking government systems, making it one of the oldest surviving parliaments in the entire world. Then, a massive leap forward happens around 1188 AD at the Cortes of Leon in Spain. Facing intense threats from neighboring kingdoms, King Alfonso IX needed maximum political support. So he did something totally unprecedented. He summoned not just the aristocrats and bishops, but representatives of the urban middle class. Suddenly, commoners were officially part of the conversation. And then, of course, we hit 1215 AD in England, with the famous signing of the Magna Carta.
So, what does this all mean? The absolute crucial point here is that this document fundamentally shifted the balance of power. The Magna Carta established, in writing, that the king could not just levy or collect taxes on a whim anymore. He actually needed the consent of a council. Honestly, this was monumental. It planted the seed that even the most powerful monarch was legally subject to the rule of law. And that essentially paved the way for what would eventually become a formalized House of Commons, where elected representatives of rural landowners and townsmen actually had a real say in things.
Section 2. Developing the modern system, shaping how we govern today.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how a lot of our modern system tracks back to the Kingdom of Great Britain. Through the 17th and 18th centuries, the British Parliament gained unprecedented stability and power, eventually becoming known to many as the Mother of Parliaments, simply because its Westminster model was heavily exported all over the globe. As those early assemblies evolved, they essentially branched into two dominant models that we categorize today. On one side, we have the parliamentary system. Here, power is fused. The executive, which is usually a prime minister, is directly answerable to the parliament, and if the parliament loses faith in that leader, well, they can dismiss them pretty smoothly via a vote of no confidence. Now contrast that with the presidential system, like what we see in the United States. This setup operates under a much stricter separation of powers. The executive does not form part of the legislature, they aren't appointed by them, and they definitely cannot be easily dismissed by a simple vote of no confidence. It's a completely different way of balancing power and holding leaders accountable.
Section 3. The public engagement imperative. Why parliaments need the people.
We've seen how parliaments were historically built to limit absolute power, right? But today, these ancient institutions are facing a very modern crisis. We are living in a rapidly changing world that is emboldened by extreme connectivity, but it's also plagued by massive global challenges and a serious rising wave of public distrust in democratic institutions. Basically, parliaments realize they can no longer just sit in their capitals and dictate policy. They desperately need to engage the people. To understand how they're actually tackling this, we are drawing directly from the 2022 Global Parliamentary Report. This is a massive, highly authoritative study published jointly by the Interparliamentary Union, or IPU, and the United Nations Development Program. This report serves as a profound call to action. It outlines a detailed roadmap for making parliaments more responsive, inclusive, and capable of sustaining democracy in an era where the civic space for public debate is genuinely under threat.
Martin Chunggang, the Secretary General of the IPU, puts it perfectly in the report. He says, quote, "Effective public engagement requires a united effort by members of parliament, parliamentary administrations, and the community." End quote. You see, it's a three-way street. The institution itself, the elected members, and everyday citizens like us must all actively participate. The system only works, and real consensus on policy can only be built if the doors remain wide open to the public.
And here is exactly what that looks like in the real world. In Rwanda, members of parliament address citizens directly on family planning issues during community workdays. Public engagement isn't just a polished website or a generic press release anymore. It's about physically getting out of the parliamentary chambers, taking parliament directly to the people, and having direct face-to-face dialogues about the issues that actually impact their daily lives.
Section 4. How Parliaments Engage Today. The Ladder of Interaction. So, if going out into the community is one strategy, how else are these legislative bodies managing to connect with their constituents in such a noisy, fast-paced world? Well, the report breaks this down into a sort of ladder of interaction, moving step by step from basic outreach to deep, meaningful collaboration. Let's walk through these 5 steps really quickly. Step 1 is information. This is simply providing access to what the parliament is doing. Step 2 is education, where parliaments actively help citizens understand exactly how the democratic process works. Step 3 is communication, establishing a real two-way dialogue. Step 4 is consultation, which is where parliaments explicitly ask the public for their views on specific policies or draft laws. And finally, the top rung, Step 5, is participation. This is the absolute gold standard, where parliaments move beyond just broadcasting facts or asking for feedback, and they actually actively collaborate with citizens to co-design policy and genuinely share in the decision-making process. Across all those steps, the report identifies several key trends that are completely reshaping how this engagement is done. Unsurprisingly, there is a massive growing reliance on digital tools to reach people exactly where they are. There is also a major cultural shift toward actively listening rather than just informing. Parliaments are fighting hard for visibility too. They have to cut through our modern blizzard of information just to be heard. And most importantly, they are responding to a growing public demand from citizens who frankly don't just want to cast a vote every few years anymore. They want continuous, direct influence over the decision-making that affects their lives.
Section 5. The future of democracy. Where do we go from here? Let's move to this and see how this builds a path forward.
For parliaments to remain resilient and relevant, they absolutely need to adapt to a new reality. The 2022 Global Parliamentary Report doesn't just diagnose the problem, it actually lays out specific strategic priorities required to make our democratic institutions fully fit for the 21st century. Think of this as a comprehensive roadmap for the future. First, parliaments must take youth seriously by collaborating directly with young people to co-design participation. Second, they must leave no one behind by creating strict inclusion action plans so that the marginalized can access state services and actually have their say. Third, they must transform through technology, developing rich portfolios of digital interaction tools. Fourth, they need to encourage internal innovation by setting up dedicated task forces. And finally, they must work together, actively sharing knowledge and partnering across different communities.
Achim Steiner, the administrator of the United Nations Development Program, summarizes this core thesis beautifully in his foreword to the report. He notes that we need much more open and representative institutions, where accountability is understood as an ongoing process, not just a one-off election event every few years. Basically, democracy requires constant daily maintenance. It is a continuous conversation. From the ancient gatherings of wise men to the complex, hyper-connected digital networks we have today, the fundamental purpose of a parliament has always been to represent the people. But here's the thing. That machinery sits totally idle without your input. Your parliament is literally built for your voice. The systems are opening up, and the tools for participation are way more accessible than ever before. So, the only real question left to answer is, how will you engage tomorrow?